We are raised on the myth that blood is sacred, that family is untouchable, and that loyalty to them is the highest virtue, even at the cost of ourselves. From our earliest days, we are quietly programmed to believe that love must be unconditional, even when it wounds. That forgiveness is a duty, even when the pain is chronic. That endurance is strength, even when it silences our soul. But what if this inherited belief is the very reason so many live emotionally confined, unable to breathe in their own truth? What if the home you were taught to protect is the very place where your spirit was first wounded? What if the chains that bind you don't rattle because they were disguised as love? This article revolves around the often overlooked toxic behaviors in family relationships, analyzed from the psychological perspective of Carl Jung. It invites you to pierce the veil of unconscious loyalty, to examine the inherited emotional patterns that pass down like ancestral shadow. Jung understood that the family is not only a system of love, but also a crucible of projection, guilt, and unspoken wounds. He once wrote, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their children than the unlived life of the parent." These are not just poetic words. They are a truth many feel in the pit of their being. A sense that they were born into emotional contracts they never agreed to, playing roles they never chose. Carl Jung didn't advocate for cutting people off in anger. He called us to see with clarity. We need to awaken to the truth behind the masks our loved ones wear, and more importantly, to the masks we ourselves put on just to belong. When guilt becomes the currency of connection, shame is used to preserve tradition, and silence is demanded in the name of unity, that is not family, that is emotional imprisonment. Jung taught that healing begins the moment you become conscious. Once you see the pattern and name the wound, it cannot hold you the same way again. This video is not about rebellion for rebellion's sake. It is not a call to abandon love, but to redefine it. To understand that self-respect is not betrayal, that emotional boundaries are not cruel, that love without truth is not love at all. Even within family, especially within family, there must be space for your wholeness to exist. Because no one, not even those who gave you life, has the right to make you abandon yourself. This is a call to awaken, to listen to that quiet voice inside that whispers, "This doesn't feel like love." To break the spell of inherited suffering. To step out of the roles that keep you small, and to walk the sacred path of individuation, where healing is not disconnection, but the deep, soul-level act of reclaiming who you truly are. So, if you've ever felt guilty for walking away, or terrified to say, "This is not okay," know this: you are not wrong for protecting your peace. You are simply answering the call to return to your authentic self. In doing so, you begin not only to heal, but to break the cycle for generations to come. 1. Emotional manipulation, the hidden chains of conditional love. It often begins with words that sound like care, but echo with control. "If you really loved me, you'd do this." "You're breaking my heart by choosing your own path." "You're so selfish." These phrases masquerade as affection, but they carry the weight of expectation and guilt. At first, the tactics are subtle. A raised eyebrow, a sigh heavy with disappointment, a lingering silence that demands your compliance. You tell yourself it's nothing, that you're just being sensitive, but with each repetition, a quiet erosion begins. You begin to doubt yourself. You tiptoe around the truth. You shrink a little more each time, choosing peace over authenticity. This is not love. This is emotional manipulation, the art of tying invisible strings to your psyche and calling it loyalty. Carl Jung referred to this as psychic possession, a condition in which another person's unresolved pain begins to occupy your mental space, steering your decisions without your full awareness. You begin to live not as yourself, but as a distorted mirror of someone else's unmet needs. And what makes this manipulation so insidious is that it's rarely conscious. The parent or family member may genuinely believe they are acting out of love, but beneath their words lies an unconscious desperation, a refusal to face their own inner fractures, a longing to control what feels uncontrollable within themselves. So instead, They attempt to heal through you. You become the surrogate for their healing, the emotional sponge, the peacekeeper, the therapist. The child who must not only fulfill their role, but also patch up their unfinished stories. And this is where the confusion deepens. Because you love them, you care. And somewhere along the line, you were taught that love means sacrifice, even if it costs you your sanity. But love without freedom is not love. It is bondage in disguise. Real life offers countless examples of this dynamic. A mother who discourages her daughter's independence, cloaking her fear of abandonment in concern. A father who demands obedience, not because he's cruel, but because he never learned how to sit with uncertainty. A sibling who guilts you for having boundaries because it reminds them of their own lack of them. These aren't villains. They are wounded souls, unknowingly projecting their inner shadows onto you. And yet, here is the hard truth. You were not born to complete their healing. You were not sent into this world to carry the emotional burdens of another adult. Your soul is not a bandage. Your purpose is not to be consumed by someone else's unlived life. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is precisely what happens when we tolerate emotional manipulation in the name of family. We internalize their wounds as our responsibility. We confuse guilt with love, and in doing so we lose our voice, our boundaries, and eventually our sense of self. But here's the awakening moment. The moment where everything shifts, when you begin to see the pattern not as love, but as programming. When you recognize the guilt not as your conscience, but as their shadow clinging to yours. That is when freedom begins. You don't have to wage war. You don't have to hate them. You simply have to stop enabling the cycle. You have to choose truth over comfort, clarity over chaos. Healing your life means stepping out of roles you never auditioned for, and it means no longer apologizing for honoring your needs. It means saying, "I love you, but I will no longer betray myself to keep you comfortable." That's not rebellion, that's reclamation. And the moment you reclaim your inner ground, your peace, your truth, you create a new pattern. One where love is no longer tied to sacrifice, and loyalty is no longer paid with self-abandonment. You begin writing your own story, not as someone's savior, but as your own. 2. The suppression of your true self, when belonging becomes betrayal. It doesn't always sound like cruelty. Often, it arrives in quiet disapproval, cloaked in concern. "Don't talk like that. Why must you always be so different? You're embarrassing us." These aren't merely words. They are subtle daggers, slowly severing you from your own essence. And the deepest cuts? They don't come from enemies. They come from those whose love you once believed unconditional, the people who are supposed to see you most clearly. What makes this wound so hard to name is that it isn't loud. It doesn't strike, it silences. It doesn't confront, it reshapes. Families often unconsciously attempt to mold their children into reflections of their own values, fears, or unfulfilled dreams. And in doing so, they may bury the child's authenticity under layers of shame, obligation, and unspoken rules. A child who once laughed freely now watches their words. A teenager with unique ideas now hides them beneath the cloak of approval-seeking. A young adult chooses paths not because they are true, but because they are safe. Safe from conflict, from rejection, from the quiet heartbreak of disappointing those they love. Carl Jung saw this dynamic with piercing clarity. He described life's sacred calling as the journey toward individuation, the process of becoming not what others expect, but who you truly are. Yet, he also knew that the path was littered with barriers, many of which masqueraded as love. The privilege of a lifetime, Jung wrote, is to become who you truly are. But what happens when that truth, your truth, is treated not as a gift, but as a threat? Perhaps you think differently than your family, your politics, your spirituality, your dreams carry a different vibration. Perhaps you dress in color while they prefer gray. Perhaps you choose creativity over conformity. intuition over tradition. And in response, they don't always attack. They question, they mock, they withdraw, they use silence as disapproval and tradition as chains. Your expansion unsettles them because your freedom awakens something they have long silenced in themselves, their own unlived life. But here is what you must remember. You were not born to fit into their mold. You were not sent here to be a character in someone else's play. You were born to be a living, breathing expression of your soul's truth. You are not here to make others comfortable with your silence. You are here to become whole. And wholeness, as Jung taught us, requires shedding the false masks others hand to us in childhood. In real life, this suppression may show up in countless ways. The father who belittles your creative passion because he never pursued his. The mother who urges you to marry not out of love, but out of fear of what others will say. The sibling who mocks your spiritual beliefs because they no longer recognize your language. These acts may not seem cruel, but slowly they demand one thing, that you abandon yourself in order to be accepted. And here lies the quiet tragedy. We often confuse acceptance with love. But love that requires self-erasure is not love. It is conditional approval wrapped in affection. The turning point comes not with rebellion, but with realization. The moment you stop asking, how can I make them accept me, and start asking, why am I betraying myself to belong? That is the moment your true self begins to return. That is the moment your individuation begins. Not in noise, but in clarity. You are not selfish for refusing to be reshaped. You are sacred for honoring your soul's blueprint. Anyone, family included, who insists you shrink to make them feel bigger does not love the real you. They love a version of you that keeps them comfortable. And that, as hard as it is to admit, is not enough. Because real love does not dim your light. It helps you shine brighter. And the journey to becoming who you truly are, it is not betrayal. It is the deepest form of respect you will ever show yourself. 3. Constant criticism disguised as concern, the poison beneath the mask of care. It often comes wrapped in silk, but it cuts like glass. I'm just saying this because I care. You're too sensitive. I don't want you to ruin your life. The words may sound gentle on the surface, but they leave wounds that bleed beneath your skin. Some family members have perfected the art of cloaking cruelty in the language of love. Their tone may be calm, their face may be soft, but their message is sharp. You are not enough. At first, you doubt your instincts. You tell yourself they mean well. You excuse their comments as tough love and concern as the way family shows they care. But over time, you begin to feel it. Not just in your mind, but in your chest. A tightening, a shrinking. You second-guess your dreams. You downplay your joy. You begin to flinch not at violence, but at words. Because you've learned that the deepest betrayals are not always shouted. Sometimes they're whispered by the ones who say they love you most. Carl Jung warned us about this dynamic through the lens of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we disown, repress, or bury in the unconscious. He taught us that what we cannot face in ourselves, we often project onto others. And in families, projection becomes a ritual. A parent who never dared to follow their passion calls your dreams unrealistic. A sibling burdened by self-hate disguises jealousy as sarcasm. A grandparent who lives with regret speaks to you only in the language of warning and limitation. They are not always aware of what they're doing, but that does not make the wound less real. When someone repeatedly criticizes you under the guise of being honest, you must understand, it is rarely about you. It is a mirror of their own pain, their own shadow, cast upon the wall of your identity. You'll never succeed at that. May be the echo of their own surrender. You're too emotional, may reflect their fear of ever being vulnerable. And if you are not grounded in your own truth, you will begin to absorb those projections as facts. You will wear their pain as your identity. You will call their voice your inner critic, not realizing it was never yours to begin with. Jung once wrote, Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But he also understood the inverse. Everything others criticize in us may also lead us to an understanding of their wounds. Their cruelty is often a cry for healing. But you are not here to carry that burden. You are not a canvas for someone else's disowned self. In real life, this criticism can take many forms. The parent who questions every decision you make, always with a sigh or a frown. The relative who turns every conversation into a subtle teardown, masked as advice. The family friend who praises your surface but dismantles your soul behind polite concern. These aren't just minor comments. They're a slow erosion of self-worth, and if you allow them long enough, they begin to sculpt your identity with hands that were never meant to touch your spirit. The truth is, you can love someone deeply and still reject the roles they try to place upon you. The black sheep, the disappointment, the one who never measures up. Those are not your truths. Those are projections born from unhealed fractures in their psyche. To set boundaries in the face of masked criticism is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is the sacred act of self-respect. You do not owe anyone access to your heart, your mind, or your future, especially not when they use that access as a way to dim your light, even if they call it love, even if they are family. Love that shames is not love. Concern that wounds are not being cared for, and honesty that breaks you down is not truth. It is trauma dressed in familiar clothing. You are not here to be reshaped by the insecurities of others. You are here to become whole. 4. Guilt as a tool of control, the invisible chains of emotional debt. You never call after everything I've done for you. If you leave, it'll break my heart. These words don't come from strangers. They come from the voices we once trusted most. The parent who raised us, the elder who sacrificed, the sibling who stood beside us. And so, we hesitate. We shrink. Not because we lack love, but because we carry guilt, like a sacred obligation, as if our freedom is a betrayal, and our boundaries are a wound to someone else's heart. But this is not love. This is guilt, cloaked in the language of affection. Guilt, when wielded as a tool, is one of the most potent forms of control, because it doesn't raise its voice. It whispers into our conscience. Carl Jung warned of this emotional entanglement, where psychic ties, especially to family, can bind us not in love, but in unconscious bondage. He understood that guilt, when misplaced, does not arise from moral clarity, but from inherited fear, internalized obligation, and ancestral expectation. This kind of guilt isn't born from wrongdoing. It's born from your becoming. From the moment you begin to individuate, choose a path of your own, and voice a truth that doesn't echo theirs, guilt is stirred. Not because you have harmed them, but because your growth reminds them of the places they never dared to go. And so they say, "After all I've done for you," not as gratitude, but as a reminder of your debt. And what happens when you internalize this emotional debt? You stop asking, "Is this my truth?" and start asking, "Will this upset them?" You begin measuring every decision by its emotional consequence on others. You suppress your instincts. You mute your desires. You live not as a sovereign being, but as a shadow of their expectations. In real life, it looks like the adult child who delays a move across the country because "Mum needs me." It's the woman who stays in a suffocating marriage because divorce would shame the family. It's the man who walks away from his calling because it's not what Dad wanted. These aren't choices. They're sacrifices made on the altar of guilt. And eventually, your soul begins to whisper, "This is not my life." Jung once said, "Guilt is always displaced. It is always something that is shifted to someone else, a symptom of a deeper, unresolved conflict. When others make you feel guilty for your joy, your boundaries, or your autonomy, what they are really expressing is their inability to face their own emptiness. They are not asking for connection, they are begging for control. And control has no place in true love. Because love says, "I want to see you fly, even if it means I have to watch from afar." Love allows freedom, not captivity. It expands with your growth. It does not shrink you into a version that fits their comfort zone. And yes, choosing yourself may feel like betrayal, but in truth, it is a sacred act of awakening, because love without freedom is not love. It is fear in disguise. To break this pattern is not to be ungrateful, it is to be awake. You are not here to carry the emotional weight of another adult's fears. You are not a redemption arc in someone else's unresolved narrative. You are not a living apology for someone's unhealed wounds. You are here to live fully, freely, and consciously. Some will never stop using guilt. That is their path. But you can choose differently. You can choose to no longer mistake manipulation for love. You can learn to sit with the discomfort of disappointing others in order to stop disappointing yourself. And in that space between guilt and growth, you reclaim your life. 5. Verbal and emotional abuse. When the familiar becomes the cage. That's just how they are. They didn't mean it. It's just how they talk. These phrases become lullabies we sing to ourselves when we are trying to survive what wounds us. And perhaps the most dangerous thing about emotional abuse isn't its volume. It's how quietly it becomes normalized. How easily we slip into excusing the inexcusable just because it came from someone who shares our blood. It begins subtly. A sarcastic jab during dinner, a passive-aggressive comment in front of others, a pattern of being ignored when you need support. Then it escalates. Dismissive tones, gaslighting that makes you question your own memory, explosive outbursts that are never followed by accountability. And yet, because you were raised in its rhythm, you interpret this storm as weather you must simply endure. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." And when emotional volatility, cruelty or silence becomes the atmosphere in which a child grows, the psyche learns to equate chaos with care. We begin to believe that pain is a currency we must pay to feel worthy of love. And so we stay. We stay in houses where love sounds like shouting. We stay in conversations where mockery is called honesty. We stay in emotional deserts where every cry for connection is met with ridicule. And then we repeat. We recreate these conditions in our adult lives, choosing partners, friends, even careers that echo the emotional climate of our childhood. Not because we enjoy the pain, but because we mistake familiarity for safety. This is the tragic loop of the wounded inner child, a concept Jung explored throughout his work. The part of us forever seeking the love we never received, in the very places we were first broken. We try to fix the past by surviving it again, hoping for a different outcome. But survival is not healing, enduring abuse is not strength, and excusing it is not love. Real-life examples are everywhere. The daughter who flinches at every raised voice because her father's rage lived in the walls of her childhood home. The man who shrinks into silence every time his mother criticizes his dreams, calling it tough love. The adult who believes they're too sensitive, too dramatic, too needy because someone once convinced them that expressing pain was a weakness. But here's the radical truth. You are not too sensitive. You are attuned. And what you're feeling is not overreaction. It is recognition. A quiet knowing that something is not right. That your spirit is not meant to be diminished for the sake of someone else's comfort. Jung would not advise you to wage war. He would ask you to see. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And abuse, emotional, verbal, or otherwise, often hides in plain sight, masked as tradition, personality, or culture. But what you see clearly, you can no longer pretend not to know. The most sacred act is not to stay and suffer. It is to break the spell, to say, this ends with me, even if they are your parents, even if they raised you, even if they never apologize. You are not selfish for walking away from someone who constantly crosses your boundaries. You are not disloyal for protecting your inner peace. You are not cruel for choosing healing over history. Let them say what they will. Let them call you distant, rebellious, dramatic. You know the truth now. That love without respect is not love. That your silence does not make you virtuous. That your worth is not measured by how much pain you can withstand. Your healing is not a betrayal, it is a revolution. A quiet declaration that your soul will no longer tolerate what it once accepted out of fear. Because you were not born to absorb the pain of generations, you were born to transform it. Carl Jung's work reminds us that the most terrifying thing a human being can do is to accept themselves completely. To look in the mirror and say, "This is who I am, and I am worthy of being whole." That is the beginning of true healing. Not in fixing those who wounded us, not waiting for apologies from those who were never taught how to love without hurting, but in rising from the ashes of silence and shame and declaring with quiet power, "I deserve better." Even if no one ever told you that, even if your childhood was built on conditions, because respect, safety, and love are not luxuries. They are not privileges. They are your birthright. You were not born to carry your family's unresolved pain like a burden draped across your back. You were not placed in this life to shrink so others could feel tall. You were not meant to explain your worth, your path, or your truth to anyone who refuses to see you clearly. The soul was never designed to live beneath someone else's shadow. It was meant to stretch toward the light of its own becoming. This is not about blame. This is about awakening, because awareness is the doorway and courage is the key. And as Jung so often taught, the path toward individuation, becoming your full, undivided self, will often require you to leave behind roles that no longer fit the person you are becoming. The scapegoat, the emotional caretaker, the invisible one. These masks must fall if you are to meet your own eyes with honesty and compassion. So here is your permission to stop shrinking for the sake of peace, to stop explaining to those who never wanted to understand, to stop tolerating the behaviors that fracture your spirit and call it love. There is no virtue in enduring what harms you. There is only repetition until you choose something different. You do not need their validation to heal. You do not need their agreement to grow. The healing begins the moment you stop betraying yourself in order to belong. And the transformation begins when you choose to stay loyal to your soul, even if that means disappointing others. As we've seen throughout this reflection, Carl Jung's wisdom is not merely a theory of the mind. It is a map of the soul, a call to inner sovereignty, a reminder that your mental and emotional well-being is sacred. No one, not even family, has the right to manipulate your heart, silence your truth, or mold you into something you are not. Not anymore. You were not born to repeat their pain. You were born to transcend it. And in doing so, you do not break the family. You break the pattern. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember. Real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: When the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.